The grand hall of the Galactic Council echoed with laughter. Not the warm kind that brought species together, but the cruel type that pushed them apart. Captain James Anderson stood at the center of the circular chamber, his blue uniform straight and crisp, his face calm despite the mockery around him. Above him, arranged in rising tiers like a massive theater, sat the representatives of over 200 alien species. Their seats glowed with soft light, creating a rainbow of colors that would have been beautiful if not for the sounds of their amusement. Seventh dimensional travel. The Astran delegate's crystalline body sparkled as it spoke, its voice translated through the chamber systems. We have studied dimensional physics for 10,000 years. Even we, with all our knowledge, have only touched the fifth dimension. More laughter followed. Anderson kept his eyes forward, remembering Dr. Walker's words before he left Earth. Let them laugh. They don't understand what we found. The Astran continued, its crystal segments shifting to form what passed for a smile in their species. Perhaps humans cannot count properly. Maybe they mistake 3 dimensions for 7. This brought another wave of laughter, louder than before. Anderson cleared his throat. The sound cut through the noise, helped by the chamber's perfect acoustics. Earth's presentation stands as given, he said, his voice steady. We have achieved stable 7th dimensional travel. We request recognition of this achievement and the associated rights under galactic law. A tall gas-based being floated forward in its containment field. Your species has been part of the galactic community for barely 50 years. It wheezed through its translator. You still use chemical rockets for your planetary defense. How dare you claim such an advancement? Anderson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. The chamber's security systems had checked it thoroughly, just a simple hologram projector. He placed it on the floor and stepped back. The device activated, showing the test footage from last week. The dimensional Voyager hung in space, its hull gleaming with the strange patterns that Dr. Walker's team had copied from the Mars ruins. As the assembled aliens watched, the ship began to shift. Not in the normal 3 dimensions, but in ways that made eyes hurt and minds struggle to understand. This is clearly fake, the Astran delegate declared, but there was a hint of uncertainty in its translated voice. Such movements are impossible without. Without what? Anderson asked quietly. Without 1,000 years of study, without crystal-based quantum computers, without the proper understanding of physics. He walked around the hologram as the ship in the recording continued its impossible dance through dimensions. Humanity has always had a gift for doing the impossible. We see walls, and we find ways through them, over them, or around them. A smaller alien, covered in fine scales, leaned forward. Your previous attempts at faster-than-light travel all failed. Why should we believe this is different? Anderson nodded. They did fail. We learned from each failure, but more importantly, we found something in the Mars ruins that everyone else missed. Something that only made sense because we were, as you say, primitive. He smiled slightly. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what experts miss. The Astran's crystalline form shifted colors rapidly, a sign of agitation. The Mars ruins were thoroughly studied by our best scientists thousands of years ago. There was nothing of value there. Nothing of value to you, Anderson corrected. But you weren't looking for what we found. You were looking for advanced technology, for complex machines. We found simple drawings, basic principles that everyone dismissed as primitive cave paintings. The laughter had died down now, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Anderson continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. In 3 days, we will demonstrate the dimensional Voyager's capabilities for all to see. Earth extends an invitation to any who wish to observe. Let's see if you're still laughing then. He picked up the hologram projector and turned to leave. As he reached the chamber's massive doors, he stopped and looked back. One final thought. If we manage this with our primitive understanding, imagine what else you might have missed while you were busy laughing at lesser species. The doors closed behind him with a soft boom, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council found itself without a ready response. In orbit above, hidden from normal space, the dimensional Voyager waited patiently for its moment to change everything. Deep within Neptune's orbit, hidden behind layers of spatial distortion, Project Horizon's main facility floated like a giant silver spider web in space. Dr. Alice Walker stood at the main observation deck, watching her life's work through the reinforced windows. The dimensional Voyager hung in the center of the facility's arms, its hull covered in patterns that looked like flowing water made of light. These weren't just decorative. They were exact copies of the strange drawings they'd found in those worthless Mars caves. "Dr. Walker," a voice called from behind her. "The final system checks are complete." She turned to face Tom, her chief engineer. Like everyone else on the station, dark circles marked his eyes from too many sleepless nights. "And?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his smile. "Everything's perfect. Those symbols from Mars, they're not just drawings. They're acting like some kind of dimensional lens. The energy flows exactly like your theories predicted." Alice nodded, remembering how the Astrans had dismissed her papers years ago. "Too primitive," they'd said, "lacking proper scientific foundation." They couldn't understand that sometimes the simplest answer was the right one. "Captain Anderson just sent word from the council," Tom continued. "They're all laughing at us, just like you said they would." "Good," Alice smiled. "The best victories come when everyone expects you to fail." She touched the window, tracing the ship's outline with her finger. "Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology. It's our ability to see things differently." The station's internal comm system crackled. "Dr. Walker to control room. Priority message from Earth Command." In the control room, screens covered every wall. Each one showed different parts of the dimensional Voyager systems. But Alice's eyes went straight to the main screen, where Admiral Jones waited with a serious expression. "Doctor," he said without greeting, "the alien observers will arrive in 6 hours. Are you certain about this? There's no shame in delaying if you need more time." Alice straightened her lab coat. "Sir, we've been ready for weeks. We were just waiting for the right moment." "The right moment being when they're all gathered to watch us fail." "Exactly." She gestured to a nearby screen showing complex equations. "We've run 300 successful tests. The ship doesn't just travel through higher dimensions. It dances through them. And thanks to those primitive cave paintings, we can do it without the massive energy costs that stop the Astrans." The Admiral's expression softened slightly. "The Council's sending their top scientists. They're hoping to prove we faked everything." "Let them come," Alice said. "Sometimes you need experts to witness the impossible." She paused, remembering something her grandfather used to say. "You know why humans reached the moon before anyone else? Because we were the only ones crazy enough to try with the technology we had." Alarms suddenly blared through the station. Not emergency alarms. These were different. Alice rushed to the nearest screen, her heart racing with excitement. "Doctor," one of her team called out. "The ship, it's starting to resonate on its own." On every screen, readings spiked. The patterns on the dimensional Voyager's hull pulsed with inner light, responding to something no one could see. Alice watched in wonder as new equations wrote themselves across her displays. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "The ship isn't just ready, it's eager. It wants to show us something." The Admiral's voice cut through her amazement. "Dr. Walker, should I be concerned?" She shook her head, smiling. "No, sir. Everything's working exactly as it should. Better, even." She turned back to face him. "Tell Captain Anderson we're ready. Let's show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate humanity." As she looked back at her ship, Alice felt a deep certainty. In 3 days, the laughter would stop, and humanity would take its first real step into the universe, not as students or followers, but as pioneers who saw what everyone else had missed. The dimensional Voyager's hull pulsed again, as if agreeing with her thoughts. Soon, very soon, everything would change. The observation room was packed. Alien scientists from 20 different species stood behind thick safety barriers, their instruments ready to record what they all believed would be a human failure. The Astran delegate's crystalline form sparkled with barely hidden amusement. Captain Anderson stood next to Dr. Walker, both watching their ship through the massive window. The dimensional Voyager's hull patterns glowed brighter than ever, pulsing in rhythm like a heartbeat. All these experts, Alice whispered to Anderson, and not one of them has asked why we painted those patterns on the hull. Anderson smiled slightly, too busy proving why it can't work to ask how it does work. Exactly. She turned to face the gathered aliens. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings of all species, welcome to humanity's first official demonstration of seventh-dimensional travel. The Astran delegate moved forward. Our instruments detect no power buildup, no dimensional distortions, nothing but simple light displays. Perhaps you should save everyone's time and admit. The delegate's words cut off as the dimensional Voyager's patterns suddenly blazed with brilliant light. The ship didn't move, not in any normal way. Instead, reality seemed to bend around it. What you're seeing, Alice explained calmly, isn't the ship moving through dimensions. You're seeing the dimensions moving around the ship. On every screen, alien instruments screamed with impossible readings. The Astran's crystalline body changed colors rapidly as it rushed to check its devices. Impossible, it declared. These readings suggest the ship exists in all dimensions at once. Alice finished. Those simple cave paintings we found on Mars. They weren't art. They were instructions. The ancestors who drew them knew something that all your advanced sciences missed. Consciousness itself is the key to dimensional travel. The ship's glow intensified. Where it had been solid before, it now seemed to exist in multiple places at once, like an infinite number of ghost images overlapping. The patterns on the hull, Alice continued, aren't technology in any way you understand. They're like sheet music for reality itself, and human minds are the instruments that play it. Anderson stepped forward. Dr. Walker, perhaps a more practical demonstration. She nodded and pressed her hand to a simple control panel. The ship's multiple images suddenly snapped together, and in the same instant, it vanished. The alien scientists rushed to their instruments, shattering in their various languages. The Astran delegate's voice rose above the chaos. As we expected, your ship has disintegrated. This is what happens when primitives. 3,000 light-years away. Alice interrupted. There's an automated beacon we placed last month. Watch the main screen. The large display lit up, showing empty space. Then, as smoothly as if it had always been there, the dimensional Voyager appeared. 0.4 seconds, Alice announced. Not only did we achieve seventh-dimensional travel, but we also did it without the massive energy costs your methods require. No stellar mass power plants. No quantum singularities. Just human minds working in harmony with universal principles you thought too simple to study. The ship vanished again, reappearing instantly outside their window. The alien scientists stood in stunned silence, their instruments recording what their theories said was impossible. But how do you control it? A gas-based being finally asked. The calculations alone would require. We don't calculate, Alice explained. We resonate. Those patterns. They're like a map that shows consciousness how to fold space. We don't force the dimensions to bend. We ask them to dance with us. The Astran delegate's color had faded to a pale blue. 10,000 years of research. And you're saying the answer was in primitive cave paintings all along. Anderson placed a hand on the window, looking at their ship with pride. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. You were so busy building bigger machines, you never stopped to think that maybe the universe itself was already conscious. Maybe it was just waiting for someone to learn its language. The ship pulsed once more, its patterns rippling like waves on a cosmic ocean. In that moment, everyone in the room understood. Humanity hadn't just caught up to the galactic community. They had leaped far ahead, seeing paths that others had been too proud to notice. The age of human dimensional travel had begun, and the universe itself seemed to be smiling. 3 days after the demonstration, alarms blared through Project Horizon's command center. Dr. Walker rushed in, still pulling on her lab coat, to find Captain Anderson already at the main console. His face was grim. "Emergency transmission from the Galactic Council," he said without turning. "Multiple colony worlds under threat." The main screen lit up with images that made Alice's heart stop. A massive cluster of asteroids, each one bigger than a city, was moving through space. But they weren't moving naturally. Their formation was too perfect, their speed too constant. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Asteroids don't move like that." The Astran delegate's hologram appeared beside them, its crystalline form dimmer than usual. "Correct, Dr. Walker. This is no natural phenomenon. Our sensors detect spatial distortions around each asteroid, similar to dimensional travel signatures, but twisted somehow." More images appeared, showing Council ships firing their most powerful weapons at the cluster. Energy beams and plasma bolts either passed through harmlessly or vanished into small spatial rifts that appeared and disappeared like bubbles. "Our weapons are useless," the Astran admitted. "The asteroids exist partially in higher dimensions, making conventional attacks ineffective. At their current speed, they will reach the first human colony world in 18 hours. Anderson's hands tightened on the console. "And the other colonies?" "The cluster's path will intersect with 4 human colony worlds over the next 3 days. Our scientists estimate total destruction in each case." The Astran's color shifted to deep blue, a sign of genuine concern. "We are sorry, but there is nothing we can do." Alice stepped closer to the screen, studying the strange distortions around the asteroids. The patterns seemed familiar somehow. "These spatial rifts, they're not random. Look at how they form and collapse." She pulled up the data from their first dimensional travel tests, placing them side by side with the asteroid readings. "There's a rhythm to it, like someone took our understanding of dimensional travel and twisted it into a weapon." "A weapon aimed directly at human colonies," Anderson added quietly, "right after we demonstrated our dimensional technology." The Astran's hologram flickered. "Are you suggesting someone is targeting Earth specifically?" "That's impossible. The only species capable of such dimensional manipulation is..." Its voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "You," Alice finished, "or at least someone with access to your research." Another alarm sounded. A second cluster of asteroids had appeared, heading toward Earth itself. On the screen, more Council ships arrived, their weapons just as useless as before. "Even if this is connected to our research," the Astran said, its tone defensive, "there's nothing we can do. Our best ships can't affect these asteroids. Your dimensional Voyager, impressive as it is just one ship against this many targets." Anderson straightened, a determined look in his eyes. "Dr. Walker, could the Voyager's dimensional drive be modified? Not just to travel through dimensions, but to affect how other objects interact with them?" Alice was already running calculations in her head. "The patterns we use, they're not just for movement. They're a language, remember? If we can understand how these asteroids are being controlled..." She turned to the Astran. "We need all your research on dimensional physics, everything you've ever done, even the failed experiments. That's 10,000 years of classified work. And if you don't share it, billions will die." Her voice softened. "Sometimes the greatest discoveries come from combining old knowledge with new perspectives. You've seen what we can do. Let us try." The Astran was silent for a long moment. Then its color shifted to a bright, determined white. "I will have everything transmitted immediately. But Dr. Walker, you have less than 18 hours. Alice looked through the command center's window at the dimensional Voyager, its hull patterns glowing softly in the darkness of space. "Then we better get started. Captain Anderson, I'll need your best crew. We're going to show the galaxy one more thing humans are good at. What's that? The Astran asked. Solving impossible problems under impossible deadlines. She smiled grimly. It's kind of our specialty. With 12 hours left before impact, the Dimensional Voyager's control room was a storm of activity. Dr. Walker hadn't slept, her eyes burning as she studied the combined data from human and Astran research. Captain Anderson stood nearby, coordinating with his crew as they prepared for launch. Look at this, Alice said, pointing to a pattern in the Astran data. Every time they tried to reach the 7th dimension, their energy matrices collapsed in exactly the same way. They thought it was a flaw in their calculations, but Anderson moved closer to see. It wasn't a flaw. It was a foundation. She pulled up the Mars cave drawings. These patterns don't just guide dimensional travel. They're a complete language for talking to spacetime itself. The Astrans were so focused on forcing their way through dimensions, they never realized you could simply ask. The ship's hull patterns began pulsing faster, responding to her understanding. On screen, the asteroid clusters continued their deadly advance, their own dimensional distortions creating a twisted mirror of the Voyager's patterns. Whoever is doing this, Alice continued, they've taken the Astrans' force-based approach and weaponized it. They're not just moving the asteroids, they're partially pushing them out of normal spacetime. That's why normal weapons can't touch them. Tom, the chief engineer, rushed in. Doctor, we've finished the modifications to the dimensional drive. But these power levels, we've never tested the ship at this intensity. Anderson's voice was firm. We don't have time for tests. The first colony world goes dark in 11 hours, and Earth follows soon after. Alice nodded, making her decision. Prepare for immediate launch. I'll pilot the dimensional systems myself. That's too dangerous, Anderson objected. The mental strain-off is exactly why it has to be me. She met his eyes. I don't just understand the theories, James. I feel them. The patterns, the rhythms, they're like music to me now. And we need perfect harmony for this to work. The Astran delegate's hologram appeared, its crystal form pulsing with anxiety. Our scientists have reviewed your plan, Dr. Walker. They say it's impossible. Even if you could generate enough dimensional force to affect the asteroids, controlling that much power would tear your ship apart. Alice smiled. That's because they're still thinking about force. We're not going to fight the dimensions. She touched the control panel, and the ship's patterns shifted, becoming more complex. We're going to dance with them. Anderson gave the order, and the crew strapped into their stations. The Dimensional Voyager hummed to life, its systems singing with power that made reality itself shiver. All stations report ready, Anderson announced. Dr. Walker, this is your show. Alice placed her hands on the dimensional control interface. The patterns on the ship's hull began to mirror her thoughts, turning the entire vessel into an instrument for her consciousness to play. What we discovered in those Mars caves wasn't just technology, she explained, as power built around them. It was an invitation. The universe isn't a machine to be mastered. It's a partner to be understood. And right now, we're going to ask it for help. The ship lifted off, its form already beginning to blur as it existed in multiple dimensions at once. Through the windows, they could see the gathered alien ships watching, their crews probably still doubting that one human vessel could stop this threat. Final preparations complete, Tom reported. Dimensional drive at maximum capacity. Doctor, good luck. Alice felt the ship's power flowing through her mind, the patterns of reality becoming clear as crystal. In this state, she could see the twisted dimensional knots around the asteroids, understand how they were being manipulated. Time to show the galaxy what happens when you mix human intuition with universal laws, she said softly. Then, louder. Captain Anderson, set course for the asteroid cluster. Let's go save our worlds. The Dimensional Voyager vanished in a flash of light that rippled across 7 dimensions, leaving the alien ships behind. In the control room of Project Horizon, The Astran delegate watched the sensors, and for the first time in its long life, began to pray. The dimensional Voyager emerged from its jump directly in front of the asteroid cluster. From this close, the dimensional distortions were visible to the naked eye. Reality itself twisted and bent around the massive rocks like dark waves in space. Dr. Walker's hands moved across the control panel, her mind connected to the ship through the patterns that glowed on its hull. "The dimensional signatures," she said, her voice distant as if in a trance. "They're not just similar to Astran technology. They're exactly the same." "Meaning?" Anderson asked, watching as the asteroids continued their relentless advance. "Meaning this attack isn't just using Astran research, it's using their exact equipment." Her eyes narrowed as new patterns formed on the ship's hull. "Someone high up in their society is behind this." The ship's sensors suddenly screamed warnings. One of the asteroids had broken formation, accelerating directly toward them. Its dimensional distortions intensified, trying to push the Voyager out of normal space. "They're trying to trap us between dimensions," Alice explained, her fingers dancing across the controls. The ship's patterns shifted in response, matching the asteroid's dimensional frequency, but with a subtle difference. "But they don't understand what we discovered." The attacking asteroid's distortion field met the Voyager's dimensional envelope. Instead of a violent collision, the two fields began to resonate together, creating patterns that rippled across reality itself. "What's happening?" Anderson demanded as the ship's hull began to glow brighter than ever. Alice smiled. "Remember how I said the patterns were like music? We're not fighting their dimensional field, we're harmonizing with it." And through that harmony, her hands made one final adjustment. "We can change the song." The attacking asteroid suddenly stopped, its dimensional distortions shifting from chaotic waves to ordered patterns that matched the Voyager's hull. Then, smoothly and impossibly, it began to move backward, returning to its original position. "How?" Tom whispered from his engineering station. "The Mars cave patterns weren't just about moving through dimensions," Alice explained, her concentration never wavering. "They were about understanding that all reality is connected. Once you see the patterns, you can change them. And if you change them with respect and harmony instead of force." She spread her hands wide, and the Voyager's patterns expanded outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. One by one, the asteroid's dimensional distortions began to synchronize with the ship's field. "Now," Alice said softly, "watch what happens when we invite the universe to help." The patterns on the Voyager's hull suddenly blazed with impossible brightness. But instead of the ship moving, space itself began to fold. The asteroids, still trapped in their synchronized dimensional fields, started to shift sideways in reality. "What are you doing to them?" Anderson asked, amazed. "Creating a dimensional pocket, a safe space outside normal reality where they can't hurt anyone." Alice's voice was strained now, the mental effort clearly taking its toll. "But more importantly, I'm tracing the dimensional signatures back to their source." New data appeared on the main screen, coordinates that led straight to a hidden facility deep in Astran space. At the same time, the asteroids began to fade from view as they slipped sideways through dimensions, guided by the Voyager's harmonious patterns. "Got you," Alice whispered as the last asteroid vanished. Then her hands dropped from the controls, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "Captain, I know who's behind this, and more importantly, I know why." Anderson helped her to her feet as the ship's patterns returned to their normal glow. "Why would anyone do this? Risk so many lives?" "Because we proved them wrong." Alice looked out at the now empty space where the asteroids had been. Some of the highest-ranking Astran scientists couldn't accept that their entire approach to dimensional physics was flawed, that a primitive species had found a better way. They thought if they destroyed our colonies, erased all evidence of our discovery, they could keep their position as the galaxy's leading scientific power. Anderson finished. "All that knowledge, and they still fell prey to simple pride." Alice nodded, then straightened despite her exhaustion. "Set course for the Galactic Council, Captain." It's time to show them exactly what happens when you underestimate humanity's ability to solve a puzzle. The dimensional Voyager turned smoothly in space, its hull patterns now pulsing with quiet confidence. They had just changed the rules of dimensional physics forever. And they weren't finished yet. The Galactic Council chamber was silent as Dr. Walker and Captain Anderson presented their evidence. Gone was the laughter that had filled the room days ago. Instead, the assembled alien species watched with a mixture of awe and shame as the dimensional recordings played on the main screen. These are the energy signatures from the asteroid attack, Alice explained, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. And these, she brought up a second set of data, are from the personal research stations of 3 high-ranking Astran scientists. The crystalline forms of the accused Astrans dulled to a pale gray as their guilt became clear. Their dimensional signatures matched perfectly with the attack's energy patterns. "We couldn't accept it," one of them finally spoke. 10,000 years of research, proved wrong by cave paintings. Alice finished. By a species you thought was primitive. She shook her head. That was your first mistake. Your second was thinking that destroying evidence would protect your reputation. Anderson stepped forward. The asteroids have been safely contained in a dimensional pocket. They can be retrieved and studied at any time. Proof of both the attack and our ability to stop it. The head of the council, a being of pure energy, moved to the center of the chamber. The evidence is undeniable. The accused will face justice for their actions. Its voice turned toward the human representatives. But there is a larger matter to discuss. Humanity has not just mastered dimensional travel. You have revolutionized our understanding of it. Alice nodded, because we looked at it differently. Your scientists tried to force their way through dimensions, treating space-time like a barrier to be broken. We saw it as a dance partner, waiting for someone to learn its rhythms. She pressed a control, and the chamber filled with the flowing patterns from the Mars caves. These aren't just instructions for dimensional travel. They're an invitation to join a conversation that's been going on since the universe began. The ancients who left these drawings understood something we all forgot. The universe itself is conscious. It's alive, and it responds to those who approach it with respect rather than force. The chamber erupted in discussion, thousands of alien species trying to grasp this new understanding. The head of the council raised its hands for silence. You offer proof of this. In response, Alice touched another control. The dimensional Voyager, waiting in orbit above, activated its patterns. But this time, every being in the chamber could feel the dimensional ripples, could sense the harmony of the ship's field reaching out to touch the fabric of reality itself. We don't just travel through dimensions, Alice explained as the patterns danced around them. We work with them, and we're willing to teach others to do the same. Teach. The Astran delegate's color shifted to show surprise. After what our people tried to do to your colonies, Anderson smiled. Humanity has a long history of learning from those who tried to harm us. We take those lessons and turn them into progress. It's another thing we're good at. The head of the council was quiet for a long moment. Then it announced, from this day forward, Earth will lead the Galactic Council's Dimensional Research Division. All species will have access to this new understanding, under human guidance. Alice stepped forward one last time. We accept, with one condition. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes and sensor arrays of countless alien species. No more laughing at primitive ideas. No more dismissing different approaches. The universe has infinite dimensions, infinite possibilities. We're all still learning, all still growing. And sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. The patterns from the Voyager swirled one last time, then faded away. But something had changed in that chamber. The aliens who had once laughed at humanity now looked to them with respect, even admiration. As they left the chamber, Anderson turned to Alice. Think they finally understand? She smiled, watching the continuing discussions among the alien delegates. They're starting to. And that's the most important breakthrough of all. Above them, The dimensional Voyager continued its quiet dance with reality, its patterns glowing like a beacon for a new age of exploration and understanding. The laughter had stopped, replaced by something far more valuable: respect, curiosity, and the shared joy of discovery.